Hello everybody, it's Kate here and welcome back to Mosse on a Monday for October 2023. You can see I've got my autumn jumper is coming back out again. You know the drill, I choose 2 non-fiction and 2 fiction books that I think you'd enjoy. But the point is just to share the love of books that have appealed to me or that I've been given or that I remember from the past. So without any further ado, I'm going to start with a real big beast of writing. And that is Peter James and his latest novel, which is called Stop Them Dead. Now, Peter James is one of those extraordinary writers who has just kept producing fantastic book after book after book. The Roy Grace series is now on the television, of course, but it's the quality of the writing that makes this stand out. And it's very hard to keep a series about a detective going and not kind of lose your audience. And Peter James, very much like Ian Rankin, has succeeded in doing that. So the latest one is set, of course, in Brighton. And it is set partially during COVID. He's very clear that he's not trying to give an accurate, newsworthy timeline of COVID, but it's one of the first books I've read that is set during COVID where you are seeing the consequences, the unexpected consequences of COVID. So it's not about COVID, but it's that. And I can't give too much away, of course, other than to say it starts with a really shocking assault, maybe murder, maybe not. And it is set in the very vile and violent and appalling world of illegal dog breeding and illegal selling. Now, during COVID, prices for dogs, many people wanted animals, of course, for company, went up astronomically and, it, of course, let a lot of criminals in. Peter James is very involved in dog charities and extremely involved with all animal charities, so it's obviously something very close to his heart. And I know that the research he did for this, he found absolutely horrifying and desperate. And it plays on the idea that really lovely, normal, completely decent people might do the wrong thing, i.e. buy a dog without actually knowing the dog's provenance, without ever meeting the dog's parent, if you like, not going to reputable breeders. And that allows the criminals in. And in this case, it's a very nice professional couple who want to get a puppy for their daughter. And they buy this puppy. While they are there, another one of the puppies bites the daughter. Little by little, it becomes clear that there was something wrong with that dog, and their daughter becomes ill and then becomes more and more ill. And before long, it's clear that the daughter has contracted rabies, and there is no cure for rabies. And the book is brilliantly written. It's incredibly tense. I would say this is one of the very best of Peter James's books. I think sometimes crime writers are underestimated in terms of their actual writing style. Lots of the backstory about who Roy Grace is and what has happened in his life. Some of those questions are answered here, but not all of them. So he is successful in that amazing juggling act of both giving you everything you need to know for this particular story, Stop Them Dead, but also leaving things a little bit open. So it's a cracking thriller, a cracking detective story set in almost contemporary Brighton. Peter James, Stop Them Dead, a Roy Grace book published by Macmillan, and it's out now. Now, the second novel. I know you don't like me doing this, but because I'm researching and still partly on tour for the Ghost Ship, my reading is quite erratic, and I'm therefore reading books either by people that I know and are friends or the people that I'm interviewing. And this novel, I'm afraid, doesn't actually come out till next year, but you can always pre-order a novel, and publishers love that. And it is a debut novel from a young writer called Kaliane Bradley, and it's called The Ministry of Time. Now, this is just a very early rough brief, and I was sent it. It was so interesting because I didn't even know who the publisher was, and it looked like it could have been a self-published book or it could have been translated. I knew nothing about it. But boy, when I started reading it, it's fantastic. It's speculative fiction, I suppose you would call it. Concept fiction, you could call it. It's on that sweet spot between something really very commercial, but also a literary novel, if you like, and that's always a holy grail. It's quite hard to find those books. But this is because Kaliane Bradley is an excellent writer, a really extraordinarily good writer. And it's a young woman of mixed heritage in terms of her ethnicity goes for a job in London, and she knows she's being interviewed for a ministry job. And when she arrives, she doesn't know what the ministry is, but little by little, as they go through her background and where she's worked before and her skills and all of these kind of things, it's, you know, you think it's clearly something to do with the Foreign Office, you think, or something like that in relatively recognisable contemporary London. It becomes clear that she is being appointed to something called the Ministry of Time. And this ministry is essentially a ministry that knows that time travel exists, and that people from the past can go backwards and forwards, and people from the present can engage with them in order to go back in time, and possibly even, you know, potentially forward in time, in order to put right wrongs, or obviously, sadly, with governments, try to manipulate things to their own benefit. And her target, in a funny sort of way, is a very famous polar explorer of the 19th century. And I decided I was still going to do this now, a long time before this book comes out, because it's not the sort of book that I would normally enjoy. And within the first couple of pages, I was gripped. The lead character, she is absolutely superb. She's got the mixture of her Cambodian background, her family's history, the fact that she's always being asked to explain about it, the way that when people hear where her parents were and where she was a refugee from, they pull up a particular face like, oh, awful, you know. So she does all those kind of things so well. The way in which people try to deal with, well, I mean, in this case, genocide, but also the minefield that there can be around different racial heritage and how people behave, and not allowing anybody to be just themselves. She's a fantastic character. You will notice I'm not really telling you her name, because I think there's so much about this book that is just about discovery on the page. It's clever, it's witty, it's thought-provoking. It asks the questions of what would any of us do if we could engage live with people from the past. In a way, it's about the romanticism of history and how we glamorise people from the past, or else excuse them, behaviours that we would not ever excuse now. And the central story, what they are trying to sort out, is a real cracker. So I've just given you a little teaser of that. I might come back to it near the time when I've actually got a real book. We're going to try and find the jacket for you so that you can go online. It's published by Sceptre, which is part of the Hachette group. But this is a young writer who I can't wait to see what she's going to write next. She was a joy to interview. I interviewed her at the Budley Salterton Literary Festival. So she is Kaliane Bradley. The book is called The Ministry of Time, and hopefully we'll have the jacket for you. Give it a go. You will absolutely not regret it. Now, from something that isn't even out yet to, I think, possibly the oldest book that I have ever done on my YouTube channel. And it is a book, and I do appreciate this is not going to be a book for everybody, but I loved it. It's a book called Galley Slave by a French writer called Jean Marteilhe, and it was first translated into English by the British playwright Oliver Goldsmith. It is about a Huguenot refugee who is born in the time when the revocation of the Edict of Nantes is about to become law by the Sun King, the grandson of the great French King Henry IV, who, if any of you read my books and you've been reading The Ghost Ship or The City of Tears before, I've been writing about the Huguenot diaspora and the ways in which Henry IV tried to bring peace to France and have religious toleration. And he did that with an edict called the Edict of Nantes. But his grandson, in 1685, revoked that and took away any religious freedom that the Huguenots had, but more than that, went into a persecution of making them entirely non-citizens, and many Huguenots who, if they did not recant, they were executed, they were imprisoned. Some women were imprisoned for 30 or 40 years. They weren't allowed to leave France, but some tried to get across the border. This young man, as he was then, is born in Bergerac, in kind of the centre of France, really, and he tries to escape across the border when he's older, but in 1701 he is tracked down and he is caught, and then he spends the next few years to 1713 as a galley slave. It is probably the only account existing account we have of what it was like to be put to the oars on a slaver ship. And it is unflinchingly awful. It is honest, but it is really listening to the voice of the past. And as someone who writes history and writes historical fiction, and I'm now writing the 4th in the Joubert Family Chronicles and still on the road talking about the ghost ship, I was given this book, and I was just blown away, because it is really like sitting in the corner of a tavern and hearing what happened. And sadly I didn't read it before I wrote the ghost ship, where that would have been extremely helpful. But I was given it by the chair of the Huguenot Museum, Professor Tessa Murdoch, and I know that they stock books in the Huguenot Museum. It's published by a little press called Seafarer's, I think it's Seafarer's Voice. Let me have a look, I'll just check the, no, it's Seaforth Publishing. And it was published in 2010. There's a great introduction about it. But what I also love about the story is that it's an insight into how publishing works. So this book was advertised, sort of in a newsletter, in a pamphlet, by the author when he was finally freed, and he was free to write his account of what had happened to him. And Oliver Goldsmith, who was actually a very well-known playwright, and of course is still one of those playwrights we know from the early 18th century, he was always broke. And he saw this advertisement for this book, and therefore got in touch, got a copy of the book, and then approached the author and said, could I please translate it? So that I also love, the idea of this is how publishing works. Very few authors actually make a full-time living out of publishing. So it is beautiful. It is very upsetting in some ways, but it is really like having a spotlight on the past. And I suppose one of the reasons I wanted to do it in this episode of Mosse on a Monday next to the Ministry of Time, Kaliane Bradley, is that it made me think, just imagine if I could have got Jean Marteilhe here and I could have sat down and had a conversation about what it was like. So this very much is for not experts, but it's not a mass market book, it's got to be said, but Galley Slave, Jean Marteilhe, and I know that it's available from the Huguenot Museum bookshop in Rochester, so you can go online and get a copy. And the new introduction is by Vincent McInerney, and this is all part of a series of books that are all dedicated to sea and seacraft. Right, finally, moving on in a way about that comment about how publishing works and how writing works, is this book, which is newly out. And again, this is not going to be for everybody, but this is for anybody who is writing. Any of you, I know many of you who are following this channel are doing so because you're writing yourself, or you would like to write yourself, or just that you're very interested in the craft of writing, not just simply the text itself. So there is a podcast series that is done by Simon Akam and Rachel Lloyd, and I have been one of their guests, and it's called Always Take Notes. And what they do is interview a range of people about their writing process, and then put it down, put the podcast out in order to, I suppose, just illustrate that there's no one way to skin a cat, that we all have completely different ways of doing everything, and it's very thorough and it's very detailed. So some of the people that they've done, I've done it obviously, Elif Shafak, Ian Rankin, Anne Enright, Ian McEwen, David Mitchell, Max Hastings, Jeffrey Archer, Monica Ali, Marlon James, Kieran Millwood-Hargrave, William Dalrymple, Christina Lamb, Tracy Chevalier, wonderful mixture of people, Joanne Harris. So they decided to do a book, and this is the book, Always Take Notes, and the subtitle is Advice from Some of the World's Greatest Writers. So, well, who are we to judge? Anyway, here is the book, and it's published by Bonnier, and it's divided into very clear and distinct sections. I'm just going to give you a sense. So the first one is early influences. There's about inspiration, plotting versus plunging, and I love that as a title because my novels are quite detailed and quite long, and many of the books that I've chosen to share with you are detailed and long and are very much to do with planning, except books that are beautifully constructed and have fantastic architecture and you know exactly where you're going. That doesn't mean that the author, when they write them, the first draft in particular, is a planner. And I am absolutely not a planner. I'm a plunger. So I loved reading all the other tidbits of advice, and I was almost screaming at the page going, I can't believe you do that, Joanne, I can't believe you do this, Howard, or whatever. So then there's research, which obviously is a big section about agenting and getting published. There's failure and rejection, very important, because every single one of us has got that story of nobody wanted your book, and or once it was published, you were at a book festival and the person sitting next to you at the dining table had a queue that went, to next Wednesday week, and you're sitting there and there's nobody at your table. Life versus writing, staying motivated, what success looks like. And I think that is a very good thing, because publishing as an industry goes in and out of phases. There are things that are in fashion and they're out of fashion. But what does it mean to have a long career? There's a great deal of attention on debuts, and I do that myself on Mosse on a Monday, because I feel that supporting new writers getting out there for the first time is important, but so is sustainability. So is the idea that, that's again why I chose Peter James to go with a debut, is that, if you look at the back of the Peter James novel, there's so many novels that he's published. Same with many of the other authors that are in this book. And of course, we change as we get older as writers. The things that we thought were important, the way that our skills develop, you never quite know. And that's, of course, why it's such a privilege and a joy to be an author, but why all of us as readers keep reading the people that we most matter. All of us have writers that the minute a new book comes out from them, if at all possible, we'll go and buy it, we'll go and borrow it from the library, or nick it from our mum or our husband or our friend or whatever. So for anybody who's interested in the behind the scenes crafting of what it means to write and to be a writer, this is a very lovely book. It's a book to dip in and out of, but also there are lots of favourite authors in there. And I think anybody who is interested, anybody who goes to literary festivals, because I know that people go to literary festivals to hear us talk about how we do it, as well as what we've done, then this book is for you. It's called Always Take Notes, Advice from Some of the World's Greatest Writers, Simon Akam and Rachel Lloyd, who are the podcast hosts, and it's published by a division of Bonnier Press. So that is it for Mosse on a Monday for October. I will be back in November, having done quite a lot of interviewing of other authors, so there'll be lots of new books for you, but also authors that I've admired for a very, very long time. Then, and I might sneak in some Christmas recommends then, because once I've done that, I will be burrowing down to finish the new Joubert novel, the last in the series of 4 novels. So, as usual, hope you've enjoyed my selection today. It doesn't matter what you're reading, it just matters that if you love a book, share the joy and spread the word. Bye for now.